Our story begins with Lin Yu, who, to avoid his family's constant pressure to marry, paid a small fee online to find a girl for a fake marriage. But at the Civil Affairs Bureau, the clerk looked at him with pure disdain, asking if he was aware that bigamy is a crime since he was already married. Walking out of the office, Lin Yu stared at the printed marriage certificate in a daze, while the girl he hired expressed her own disappointment. She asked why he'd waste money hiring her if he was already a married man, then quickly vanished after declaring she wouldn't be returning his deposit. He stood there frozen, unable to process the situation. After all, he had never even held a girl's hand, so how could he possibly be married? We see him look at the document again. The man in the photo was definitely him, but the woman was a stranger named Shinyu. She was undeniably beautiful, yet he had no idea who she was. So he snapped a photo and sent it to a mysterious contact to investigate. The contact replied instantly, and suppressing his confusion, Lin Yu rode his battered electric scooter into a luxury villa complex. As he parked, he overheard the servants gossiping behind his back about his appearance, though their words quickly turned sharp and unkind. They whispered that he was the unacknowledged, illegitimate son of the Lin family, whose mother had forced her way in years ago while pregnant. The servants claimed his mother was thick-skinned for staying, while Lin Yu had at least shown some sense by moving out back in middle school. He pretended not to hear them and walked into the living room, where his mother, Lu Li, was waiting by the door to intercept him. She anxiously dragged him upstairs to find his brother, pausing only to ask if he had successfully obtained his marriage certificate yet. She reminded him sternly that Shin Xin was his brother's fiancée, a woman from a top-tier family that an illegitimate son could never hope for. In her eyes, only his brother was worthy. Though Lin Yu's gaze flickered with irony, Shin Xin had actually pursued him for 4 years in college. Yet on graduation day, she ended up with his brother, Lin Fan, and Lu Li demanded Lin Yu marry someone else immediately to end any lingering possibilities. Since childhood, whenever he and Lin Fan clashed, his mother forced him to yield unconditionally. Now, he looked at her with a cold indifference. He told her clearly that this would be the last time, a final act to repay her for giving him life. But Lu Li only responded with an impatient shrug. Upon entering Lin Fan's room, his brother greeted him with a smile, asking why he had come, but Lu Li didn't give him a chance to speak. She announced proudly that Lin Yu had gotten married today, leaving Lin Fan wearing a look of genuine, wide-eyed surprise. Lu Li sneered, claiming no one of status would ever marry him, and that he likely found some street thug of a girl. She added that he probably didn't dare bring her home, fearing her poor appearance would offend them, while Lin Fan's voice turned bitter. Lin Fan remarked that Lin Yu was handsome. After all, Shin Xian had chased him for 4 years, but beauty was useless without status. He suggested that only some lowlife would agree to marry him, treating Lin Yu like a mere toy to be played with and discarded. Lu Li insisted that only Lin Fan had the status to match a lady of quality, though Lin Yu knew the woman in the photo was no thug. He didn't bother to argue. Meanwhile, Lin Fan finished dressing but found his shirt too tight to bend over and put on his shoes. Lin Fan gave a slight, knowing smile, and Lu Li immediately shoved Lin Yu, calling him a useless thing for his lack of initiative. She demanded he help his brother with his shoes, but Lin Yu remained cold, suggesting she could easily do it herself. Lu Li's temper flared as she asked if he thought having a wife made him independent, reminding him he still relied on the Lin family. Her voice rose as she warned that if he didn't stay on his brother's good side, he and his wife would one day come begging for help. She claimed that since the family raised him, he should serve them like a slave. But before Lin Yu could retort, a new figure appeared. His father, Lin Jinan, stood at the door and demanded to know why they were arguing when an important guest was expected. Lu Li immediately began to wail, complaining that Lin Yu had become disrespectful the moment he received his marriage certificate. Lin Jinan turned to his son, asking why he hadn't let the family arrange a match, then asked to see the document. Faced with this sudden, unfamiliar concern from his father, Lin Yu hesitated before pulling the paper from his bag, only for Lu Li to snatch it. She mocked him, eager to see the name of his delinquent wife, while Lin Fan curiously asked about the upcoming guest. Lin Jinan looked genuinely excited, as if the guest's arrival was a great honor, and spoke with a sense of profound importance. He finally revealed the name, Shin Yuchu. Upon hearing it, Lin Yu froze in complete and utter disbelief. Seeing their confusion, Lin Jinan proudly explained that she was a mysterious figure, the aunt of Lin Fan's fiancé, Shin Xian. At only 28, she had already become the true head of the Shin family, leaving Lu Li to gasp in sudden realization. She was far more influential than Shin Xian, holding real power that eclipsed any mere granddaughter of the main house. Lin Jinan continued, his voice filled with a certain gravity. He mentioned that this Miss Shun was already married, causing Lin Yu to narrow his eyes in thought. If the woman on his certificate truly was her, then Shun Yuchu surely knew the truth behind this arrangement. Lu Li, however, sounded disappointed, wondering who could possibly be a better husband than her Lin Fan. Lin Jinan frowned, deep in thought, noting that no one really knew. Apparently, both she and her husband avoided social gatherings entirely. He wondered why she would visit in person today, but Lu Li insisted it was simply because Lin Fan was so outstanding. She was convinced he had finally caught the Shun family's attention. Having said her piece, she tossed aside the marriage document she hadn't even bothered to read. To be honest, she seemed more invested in this than Lin Fan's own mother. Just then, the butler arrived to announce that the guests were nearly there. As Lin Jinan rushed downstairs, he paused by Lin Yu, casually suggesting he stay for a celebratory drink since he hadn't been home in so long. Lin Yu nodded, deciding to stay. He had to see for himself who this Shen Yuchu really was. Meanwhile, Lu Li watched Lin Fan with unrestrained joy. 20 years ago, if the elegant Li Xia hadn't appeared, Lu Li would have been the one to marry into the Lin family. Her hatred for Xia ran deep, so deep, in fact, that she had swapped their infants at the hospital when they gave birth on the same day. Now, her biological son Lin Fan lived as the young master, while the true heir, Lin Yu, was treated as a despised, illegitimate child. After heading downstairs, Lin Yu leaned into the shadows near the staircase, silently waiting for the Shun family to arrive. After a while, we see Lady Li Xia descending the stairs, supported by a servant. She wore a purple qipao, her frame thin and fragile. She possessed a scholarly grace, even as her servant whispered that she was too unwell to be out of bed. Lady Xia shook her head between coughs, insisting she couldn't miss such an important day for her son, Lin Fan. Watching her from behind, Lin Yu felt a profound sense of longing. It was ironic, really, that she was the only source of warmth he had ever known. When they were younger, Lu Li often denied him food, but after Lady Xia discovered this, she began leaving meals in the garden for him every day. She did this for 12 years. Without her quiet kindness, he likely would have given up on himself long ago. As she walked away, the sound of her persistent coughing made him frown with worry, but then, a sudden commotion erupted at the entrance. The Shen family had finally arrived. Lin Jinan and his wife greeted them at the door, and after a few pleasantries, they stepped aside for the group. As the crowd filed in, we see Shen Yuchu. Her face was even more stunning than in the photos, possessing a cold, elegant aura. Sensing his gaze, she suddenly looked over. That look from her caused a stir in Lin Yu's heart, making him want to peer deeper into her eyes. However, Shen Yuchu quickly looked away, leaving him quite puzzled. He couldn't tell if she actually recognized him or not. Lin Jinan offered a flattering smile, asking where her husband was and why he hadn't joined her. As those words left his mouth, we see her in a formal dress, looking far more mature than in her university days. She didn't notice Lin Yu, distracted by her chat with Lin Fan. While Lin Yu stood there quietly, Lu Li suddenly grabbed his arm, hissing in a low voice, demanding to know why he was still there. She asked if he still had feelings for Shen Exine, reminding him sharply that the woman was now his sister-in-law. He simply brushed her off with a sneer. He told her plainly that he had no interest in being a homewrecker, and that Mr. Lin himself had invited him to stay for a drink. Ever since he was old enough to understand the world, he had called his father Mr. Lin. Lu Li grit her teeth in anger, claiming it was just a polite gesture. She told him he clearly didn't know his place, noting that on an occasion like this, even she wouldn't dream of embarrassing the family. She ordered the illegitimate son to get out immediately. Lin Yu frowned with impatience, but just as he was about to speak, he spotted Shen Yuchu heading toward the balcony to take a call. He gave Lu Li a perfunctory nod and followed her instead. Just as he approached, Shen Yuchu hung up the phone. She turned a cold, piercing gaze toward him, causing him to pause mid-step. Meeting that dangerous look, Lin Yu let a small smile play on his lips and testingly called out the word, wife. Her eyes remained icy. He stared directly at her, watching for any reaction, but her coldness only deepened. There wasn't a single flicker of emotion in her expression. When she turned to leave, he quickly stepped forward to block her path, asking if she truly didn't recognize him. She looked down at him coldly. She told him to move, asking why she should know him at all. She added that she was married and he should show some self-respect. It seemed she genuinely didn't know him, yet she claimed to be married. He wondered if the registry office had made a mistake and asked who her husband was. None of your business, she replied, for cold words. In response, he pulled out the marriage certificate and held it out in front of her. He asked if the woman on the paper wasn't her, but as Shen Yuchu's eyes fell on the groom's name, she simply offered a mocking sneer. She told him that if he was going to forge a document, he should at least be professional about it. Without another word, she turned away from the garden. We see her stride toward the parking lot, and though Lin Yu tried to follow to explain himself, 2 bodyguards stepped in to block his path. He shouted after her that the certificate was real, and she could check the records herself, but Shen Yuchu simply got into her car and drove away. Her assistant stayed behind while Lin Yu returned to the living room, only to run straight into Lin Fan, who had witnessed the entire confrontation. Lin Fan's eyes flickered with a hidden thought, while Lin Jinan looked on with deep worry, wondering if they had somehow offended their guest. Clenching his fists, Lin Fan spoke with a hesitant tone, claiming he saw Lin Yu harassing the lady until she left in a fit of anger. He added that she left a warning to discipline the family better, suggesting that Lin Yu's behavior might make the Shuns look down on their upbringing. Lin Jinan's face turned a grim shade of ashen. Meanwhile, we find Lin Yu on his electric scooter, having lost track of Shen Yuchu's car. Just as he was feeling frustrated, his phone rang. A woman's voice on the other end informed him that the information on Shen Yuchu had been found. It turns out she is the second daughter of the Shun patriarch, rumored to be so cold-blooded that she was sent abroad as a child. Everyone assumed the family business would go to the eldest son, Shin Xing's father, but no one expected what happened next. Shin Yuchu had returned only last week, using ruthless methods to force the old man into retirement and take direct control of the Shin group. Lin Yu instructed his contact to find her schedule so he could track her down again. Hanging up, he rubbed his temples in exhaustion. Things were becoming complicated. A woman of her status wouldn't be easy to meet again. To be honest, calling her wife earlier probably didn't help. He sighed and started his battered scooter, slowly heading home. He left the bustling city center behind, heading toward the quiet outskirts. He arrived at a modest village within the city. When he first moved out of the Lin household, he had very little money and could only afford an old rental. He had stayed there ever since, having grown used to the place. But as he turned the corner toward his house, an elderly woman suddenly darted into the road. He slammed on the brakes, narrowly avoiding a collision. At first, he feared she was a scammer, but he soon realized the old woman was quite well dressed. She wore a tag around her neck with a contact number and a note. It was a request for help, should the elderly woman ever lose her way. The tag noted a reward for calling the contact number, and it was clear the elderly woman suffered from Alzheimer's. We see Lin Yu immediately take out his phone to dial. As he began to input the number from the tag, the blank-eyed woman suddenly grabbed his wrist, her eyes suddenly sparkling with recognition. She called him her grandson-in-law, a claim that made Lin Yu's mouth twitch. After 22 years of being single, he wondered how he had suddenly gained another wife today. Finding the situation rather amusing, he casually asked who her granddaughter was. She struggled to remember, saying her name was Shun something. The name was on the tip of her tongue, but it vanished the moment she tried to speak. The old woman grew anxious, her mouth opening and closing without a sound. Lin Yu gently told her not to worry, assuring her it was fine if she couldn't remember. After calming her down, he finally placed the call. Meanwhile, on a nearby street, we find Shin Yuchu sitting in her car with a grim expression. Beside her, her subordinate Lu Chong hardly dared to breathe. He apologized for his negligence in letting the old lady wander off. Shin Yuchu remained silent, though the air around her felt cold enough to freeze. The old lady was usually in a daze, so no one expected her to suddenly improve, send everyone away, and sneak out the door. Security footage revealed she had actually taken a bus to the outskirts. This area was quite dilapidated, and the lack of cameras meant they had to search street by street. Just as they were beginning their search, her phone rang. Shin Yuchu answered immediately, hearing Lin Yu's calm voice on the other end. He told her that the elderly woman from her family was currently with him. Upon hearing this, the atmosphere inside the car instantly turned to ice. Everyone sprang into action, some prepared to call the police, while Lu Chong attempted to trace the signal. To be honest, they assumed the worst. With a sharp gaze and a voice like frost, she asked how much money he wanted. Lin Yu simply hung up. 5 minutes later, they arrived at the location. However, Lin Yu had already departed, leaving only a police officer waiting with the old woman. Shin Yuchu rushed over, asking her grandmother how she ended up there. The old lady looked quite mysterious as she whispered that she had come to find her grandson-in-law, who lived nearby. Shin Yuchu frowned, insisting there was no such person. The grandmother protested, claiming she had seen him, though she grumbled that the heartless boy had left her with the police. Then, she asked to see the phone. Shin Yuchu handed it over, and the old woman carefully copied the recent incoming number into a small notebook she carried. She was delighted to finally have her grandson-in-law's contact information. The next morning, Lin Yu received a call from his university mentor, Professor Wen. Upon entering the office, he found Lin Fan and Lu Li already there. Both he and Lin Fan attended Haicheng University, where Lin Fan prided himself on being an elite student. To avoid overshadowing Lin Fan, Lin Yu had intentionally chosen the most obscure major, energy and power, but 2 years ago, new energy suddenly became a massive trend. Lin Fan had immediately transferred departments to become his classmate again. While Lin Fan's presence was expected, we wonder why Lu Li was also there. Before he could process this, Professor Wen spoke with a grave expression, informing Lin Yu that his graduate school recommendation had been revoked. His mother had claimed his character was unfit for the program. The professor urged him to apologize to her, hoping he wouldn't ruin his promising future over a grudge. Lin Fan sighed, pretending to be helpful, and told Professor Wen that Lin Yu's mother was only acting in his best interest. She then turned to Lin Yu, claiming he had offended Miss Shun, who had supposedly vowed to make him disappear from Haicheng entirely. It took a moment for Lin Yu to realize she meant Shin Yuchu. He had only spoken a few words to her, and she hadn't seemed angry when she left. He suspected Lin Fan was lying, as usual. While he was thinking, Lin Fan walked up to him with a look of feigned concern. He handed Lin Yu a plane ticket, claiming their father bought it, so he could flee the country before the Lin family lost the power to protect him. A flash of mockery crossed Lin Yu's eyes. They were clearly just afraid he would tarnish the family name. Lin Fan then pulled out a bank card. He asked if Lin Yu was worried about surviving abroad, offering 50,000 yuan from his own pocket as a temporary allowance. Lin Yu found it quite amusing that the great young master of the Lin family could only spare 50,000. Suddenly, Lu Li snatched the card away. She scolded Lin Fan, demanding to know why the Lin family should even bother buying him a plane ticket, let alone giving him money. When Lin Yu questioned her authority, she snapped that she was his mother, adding that with his poor grades, he should just go work instead of studying. Professor Wen tried to intervene, explaining that there was a misunderstanding and that Lin Yu's performance at the university had actually been. Lu Li cut him off mid-sentence, telling the professor not to defend him. She claimed to know exactly what kind of person Lin Yu was. She sneered that he only wanted to attend graduate school because Lin Fan was doing it, telling him to look in a mirror before comparing himself to his brother. The professor was taken aback, noting with confusion that he didn't recall Lin Fan being recommended or even taking the entrance exam. Lin Fan gave a humble smile, claiming he was admitted through a special recruitment route. He mentioned a certain Dr. Yu, who had achieved a breakthrough. Apparently, this Dr. Yu had successfully patented a hydrogen-based clean fuel and was awarded a doctorate. Lin Yu was internally stunned to hear that name. Lin Yu was baffled, as he had no idea he was being specially recruited. To repay Madame Lu's kindness, he had spent years providing technical support to the Lin family company under the pseudonym Dr. Yu. He had even fabricated a backstory about being a sponsored student. Lin Fan continued spinning the web of lies, claiming that his mother had once funded Dr. Yu's education years ago. According to Lin Fan, once Dr. Yu finished her studies, she sought out the family and declared Lu Li her savior. For years now, she had supposedly been providing the company with technical support. Lin Fan boasted that she would never refuse any request he made. Professor Wen, falling for the story completely, eagerly asked where this mysterious Dr. Yu was currently working. Lin Fan claimed the dean would soon invite Dr. Yu to teach at their university. Overjoyed, Professor Wen turned to Lin Yu, noting that his research direction was identical to the doctor's. The professor promised to introduce him, suggesting that if Dr. Yu spoke up on his behalf, there might still be hope for his graduate recommendation. Lin Fan feigned concern, asking if that was truly wise. He reminded them that the Shun family was the wealthiest in Haicheng and provided massive research funding to the school every year. He noted that while Dr. Yu was currently a rising star, the school would have a difficult choice to make if she actually decided to intervene. Lin Fan sighed, adding that Dr. Yu only helped because of his mother. If it were for him, she would spare no effort, but for Lin Yu, it was a different story. Lu Li curled her lip in disdain, telling them not to waste their breath. She sneered that after offending Miss Shun, Lin Yu's dream of finding work in Haicheng was over. She didn't believe anyone could truly dominate the sky in Haicheng. Professor Wen, frustrated by her attitude, told Lin Yu that if he couldn't find a job, he should simply become his teaching assistant. We see a rare moment of warmth in Lin Yu's heart. He gently told the professor not to worry, claiming his issue with Miss Shun was merely a misunderstanding that would soon be cleared up. Seeing this, Lin Fan clenched his fists, his voice dripping with a strange, mocking tone as he addressed his brother. He asked if Lin Yu intended to keep pestering Miss Shun, reminding him that she was already married and that his behavior was truly inappropriate. Predictably, Lu Li's temper flared. Without a word, she swung her hand and slapped Lin Yu across the face right in front of the professor. Lin Yu looked at her in disbelief, but Lu Li showed no remorse. She pointed at his nose, shouting that he seemed to have forgotten the family rules during their years apart. She demanded he apologize to his brother immediately and promised never to see anyone from the Shun family ever again. Did they really think he was still that ignorant boy who lived in Lin Fan's shadow? Since reason had failed, he decided it was time to stop showing them any mercy. Watching from the side, Lin Fan felt a surge of smug satisfaction. He remembered how Lin Yu used to bow to him as a child, never daring to talk back or strike back. When they met again at university, Lin Yu still looked poor, yet he had the audacity to stand tall. To Lin Fan, this was an insult that had lasted for years. Lin Fan thought to himself that without a beating, his brother had forgotten his place. But just as he expected Lu Li to teach him a lesson, Lin Yu slowly approached him. Lin Fan curled his lips, expecting an apology, but instead, Lin Yu suddenly looked up and slammed a fist directly into his face. Lin Fan's head spun as the blow dazed him. Lu Li rushed forward, screaming at Lin Yu for hitting him, but the young man turned his head with a chilling intensity. We see Lu Li freeze in her tracks, startled by the murderous aura radiating from him. She stammered, calling him an ungrateful wolf and reminding him she was his mother. Lin Yu's voice was ice-cold as he spoke each word deliberately. He told her that since she failed as a mother, she shouldn't blame him for failing as a son. He warned her never to interfere in his life again. If she ever tried anything, he promised to return the favor twofold upon Lin Fan. Turning away, he bowed deeply to Professor Wen, thanking him for his care over the last 4 years and promising to return once his affairs were settled. After leaving those words behind, he turned and walked away without a hint of hesitation. It took until his silhouette vanished for Lu Li to finally snap out of her shock. As we follow Lin Yu out of the school gates, his phone rang. It was Chiyue, reporting that he had finally uncovered the truth about Shin Yuchu. Chiyue explained why the woman claimed to be married while Lin Yu didn't recognize her. Despite its outward glamour, the Shin family had been torn apart by internal strife. The family patriarch favored the eldest branch and wanted to hand the empire to them. As the youngest daughter, Shin Yuchu had been constantly suppressed. Years ago, the old man tried to force her into several unreliable political marriages. To be honest, the situation back then was an absolute mess. The conflict only ended when Shin Yuchu claimed she had already registered a marriage with a husband from an ordinary family. This mysterious husband was quite interesting, as he never appeared in public and never attended a single Shin family banquet. Chiyue paused for dramatic effect, suggesting there was only one truth. But before he could reveal it, Lin Yu had already realized what was happening. He asked if Chiyue had found her schedule and contact information. Chiyue felt a bit choked up by the interruption, but dutifully replied that he would send the itinerary shortly. He couldn't find her private number, but Lin Yu wasn't worried. He would simply go and intercept her. For someone of her status, a private number would naturally be a secret. Chiyue immediately began to gossip, noting that she was surrounded by bodyguards and wouldn't be easy to approach. He asked if Lin Yu planned to use force or keep a low profile. Lin Yu simply let a thin, cold smile play across his lips. At the entrance of the Shin group, we see Lin Yu adjusting a courier's uniform. Holding a delivery box, he walked up to the front desk and asked for Miss Shun. He explained that the package required a personal signature. After the receptionist called the secretarial office, Lin Yu was finally allowed to head upstairs. Entering the private elevator, he ascended to the 88th floor. As the doors opened, the view expanded into a massive, open-plan workspace. An entire department of over 100 people worked here, all dedicated to serving Shin Yuchu alone. Lin Yu followed a secretary toward the main office. They reached the CEO's door and knocked. A pleasant voice from within called out for them to enter. But just as he thought he would finally see her, a figure suddenly stepped out to block his path. It was Lu Chong, who frowned as he recognized the visitor. "Stop right there. Mr. Lin, what are you doing here?" Lu Chong's expression was sour. He vividly remembered Lin Yu bothering Shin Yuchu at the Lin residence yesterday. She hadn't pressed charges then. But now, the young man had the audacity to disguise himself as a courier to harass her again. Lu Chong waved over two security guards immediately. He barked at them for failing to check IDs, asking how any random person could reach the top floor. Lin Yu remained calm, asking if the group looked down on couriers. Lu Chong sneered, accusing him of twisting the situation. He claimed they respected all professions, but doubted Lin Yu was actually a delivery man. He demanded to see a work permit. To his surprise, the moment the words left his mouth, a valid ID card was thrust right in front of his face. Lu Chong's face stiffened. He stammered, suggesting that Lin Yu must have just registered for it today. But as the ID was opened, the truth was revealed. The registration date was from 8 years ago. Lu Chong was stunned. Lin Yu simply asked if a student wasn't allowed to work part-time back then. In a lazy tone, Lin Yu spoke toward the door, asking if Miss Shun was ready to cooperate with his work. A melodic voice drifted out from the room. She told them to let him in. Lin Yu gave Lu Chong a provocative glance, watching him nearly explode with rage before stepping past him into the office. Shin Yochu's office followed a minimalist design, making the space feel devoid of any warmth. She finished signing a document before finally looking up. Her bright eyes showed no emotion whatsoever. Lin Yu pointed to the delivery slip and politely asked Miss Shun to sign right there. Her gaze lingered on him for a brief moment before she took the pen to sign. That was when Lin Yu decided to drop a bombshell. He told her quite bluntly that she wasn't actually married at all. The woman froze mid-motion, her cold gaze locking onto him with sudden intensity. He knew his guess was correct. When registering at the Civil Affairs Bureau, personal data must be filled in by hand, leaving no room for such errors. Shin Yuchu claimed to be married to the outside world, yet she didn't even recognize the man she was supposed to be wed to, which, naturally, said it all. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly as the weight of his words began to sink in. He spoke with absolute sincerity, telling Miss Shun that while he knew it sounded completely absurd, they truly were married. Shin Yuchu slowly sat up with a dignified air, her expression hardening as she told Mr. Lin to stop wasting his efforts. She made it clear that even if she were single, she would never marry him just to spite Shin Xian. He was momentarily stunned. It seemed she only knew of his past with Shin Xian and assumed this was a revenge plot, which is why she didn't believe a word. He tried to explain that he wasn't there because of Shin Xian, but to get a divorce. She simply cut him off, uninterested in any drama. After briskly signing the delivery slip, she handed it back and warned him to stop harassing her, or she wouldn't be so polite next time. That sparked a bit of temper in him. He pointed out she had already been quite impolite by threatening to make him vanish from Haiching. Shin Yuchu frowned, confused about when she had ever said that. But before she could finish, her phone rang with a specific ringtone. It was the caregiver calling to report that the old madam had disappeared again. Panic flared in her eyes as she rushed out. Lin Yu tried to follow to finish their conversation, but Lu Chong blocked his path, advising him to leave well enough alone. And so, he was escorted out of the Shin group. But just as he reached his front door, he sensed someone behind him. He turned to find the same elderly woman from before, creeping along stealthily. Before he could speak, the little old lady grabbed his wrist. She declared that her grandson-in-law wasn't going to abandon her again. A short while later, we find them inside his rented apartment. The old woman sat at the table and downed 3 glasses of water. He tried to tell her once more that he wasn't who she thought he was. She was stubborn, clutching her glass and drinking even more. Realizing logic wouldn't work, he pulled out his phone to call the previous number. The call was answered instantly. The woman's voice sounded strangely familiar, but before he could say a word, the old lady snatched the phone away. Meanwhile, Shin Yuchu was nearby with a search party. She looked calm on the surface, but deep down, she was incredibly anxious. Her grandmother didn't just have Alzheimer's. At 87, her organs were failing, and any disappearance was a life-threatening emergency. The moment her phone rang, she answered it, only to hear her grandmother's energetic voice telling her not to come. She was with her grandson-in-law. It was that same boy from before, and the old madam was with him again. Shin Yochu's face darkened as she demanded to know their location. She warned her grandmother that she would find her regardless, but the old lady snapped back, forbidding her from coming or even sending scouts. Shin Yuchu rubbed her temples in frustration, covering the microphone to whisper a question to the doctor about bringing her back by force. The doctor shook his head, explaining that the old madam couldn't handle any stress right now. It was best to just follow her lead for a while. With a sigh of helplessness, Shin Yuchu tried to coax her grandmother again, mentioning her medicine, but the old lady insisted she had it with her. She told her granddaughter not to worry and hung up. The old woman turned to Lin Yu, proudly declaring she had handled her granddaughter. He was left utterly baffled by this irresponsible family. Just as he was about to call back, his phone chimed with a friend request. The message simply read, "The old lady's granddaughter." He accepted the request, and a message arrived instantly, asking him to look after her grandmother for a while since she was too fragile for stress. He let out a cold chuckle. He began typing a blunt refusal, wanting to make it clear that his home wasn't a charity ward. Before he could finish the sentence, a noise from the kitchen caught his attention. He rushed over to find the old lady boiling an egg. He asked if she was hungry, noting that just an egg wasn't much of a meal, but the old woman just gave him a warm, wrinkled smile. She told her grandson-in-law that rolling the warm egg on his face would help the swelling go down. Lin Yu froze in place. He hadn't realized it, but ever since his own mother had struck him earlier that day, he had been carrying a cold, bitter weight in his heart. But in an instant, the old woman's simple kindness melted that chill away. He looked back at his phone, only to see a flash of orange on the screen. The granddaughter had sent a transfer of 300,000 yuan, noting it was just for 1 week's expenses and to ask for more if needed. He stared at his draft, deleted the refusal, and simply typed, "Fine." He wasn't quite sure why he was suddenly getting involved in this mess. He told himself it was only because the offer was too good to refuse. Meanwhile, back at the Lin household, Lin Fan's face was still badly swollen. With the handprint still visible, Lu Li kept her head down, muttering that Lin Yu was clearly just jealous of Lin Fan's upcoming marriage to Shen Exine. She promised that once the father returned, he would teach that little beast a lesson. Just then, Li Xia dragged her frail body down the stairs. Li Xia remained firm, insisting that Lin Yu wasn't that kind of person and that the others must have provoked him first. Lin Fan, though clearly annoyed, quickly changed the subject. He asked if she could invite Dr. Yu to serve as a mentor at Haicheng University. However, Madame Lin immediately refused his suggestion with a sharp tone. She reminded Lin Fan that one shouldn't exploit past favors, especially since Dr. Yu had already done more than enough for the family business over the years. Lin Fan wasn't surprised by the rejection. He argued that since Haicheng was the best university around, perhaps Dr. Yu actually wanted to go there herself. He suggested that acting as a bridge between her and the school would be a way to repay her help. Madame Lin found this logical and reached for her phone. She opened her messaging app to ask, while Lin Fan sat beside her, adding that any debt Dr. Yu owed the family had surely been paid by now. He proposed hosting a banquet to thank her properly, suggesting it would be much better to ask her about the university position in person. He knew Dr. Yu rarely refused Madame Lin's requests. If she showed up, he could ask to be her graduate student, and she certainly wouldn't say no. Persuaded by his words, Madame Lin sent a message to Dr. Yu, asking if she had any time to come over for a visit soon. When Lin Yu saw the message, his heart skipped a beat. He wondered why Madame Lin would suddenly want to meet. Perhaps her health was failing again? Recalling her persistent cough, he felt a wave of anxiety. He stood up immediately, typing back that he was free to come over right that moment. But as he hurried toward the door, another message arrived from Madame Lin, telling him there was no rush and asking if he was working overtime on Saturday. He realized then that his concern had clouded his judgment. A bitter smile touched his lips as he remembered being cast out of the Lin family 10 years ago. He told himself that after all these years, it was finally time for a face-to-face meeting. He replied, insisting that he should be the one to host the dinner. He sent over a restaurant location for Saturday at 6. After closing the chat, he noticed several new messages from Shin Yuchu waiting for him. They were detailed instructions on how to care for her grandmother. Seeing this, he quietly slipped into the guest bedroom to film a short video for her. Meanwhile, on a nearby street, 2 high-end, fully equipped vans were parked discreetly. Inside, we see Shin Yuchu working on her laptop. A notification chime broke the silence. She picked up her phone to check the message, and for a moment, her expression shifted. That icy, unchanging face of hers actually showed a hint of surprise. The family doctor immediately asked if something had happened to the old madam. Shin Yuchu pressed her lips together and handed over the phone. In the video, the old madam was tucked into floral sheets, sleeping peacefully. It was only 9 in the evening, and yet the old madam was already asleep, a miracle, considering she usually struggled to drift off before 1 in the morning. The family doctor was visibly stunned, noting that the old madam clearly felt a unique connection to this young man, which could be the key to her recovery. Shin Yochu's gaze deepened as she fell into thought. The following morning, we returned to Lin Yu, who received a new message from her. Their back-and-forth exchange was starting to feel like a conversation between old friends. Suddenly, she asked if she could visit her grandmother that evening. Lin Yu replied that she was welcome anytime and sent over the address. A little later, while he was waiting outside, a familiar voice suddenly called out to him. He turned to find a face he knew all too well. It was Shin Xian. However, the face that was usually so warm and considerate was now clouded with a dark expression. During their university years, Lin Yu had always been a loner, while Shin Xian was the outgoing one who always stayed by his side. She had been his only true friend, but now, their relationship had become incredibly awkward. After a moment of hesitation, he asked if she needed something. Shin Xian let out a cold laugh, revealing that Lin Fan had told her the truth about his background. She demanded to know why he had kept it a secret. She felt like a fool for chasing someone like him for 4 years. Hearing this, Lin Yu felt as though a heavy hand was squeezing his heart. He hadn't expected 4 years of friendship to be shattered so easily. He took a step back to create some distance, but Shin Xian stepped forward aggressively. She demanded an explanation, but he simply gave a mocking scoff. He turned to leave. If she looked down on his origins, then this friendship was over. His decisive departure left Shin Xian feeling strangely agitated. Seeing him walking away, she acted without thinking and grabbed his wrist. She told him he couldn't leave. Lin Yu looked back, asking what else she wanted, while Shin Xian's face remained tense with a rising, inexplicable anger. She was the one who had pushed him away, yet she felt as though she was the one being abandoned. Then, she shifted back to her mocking tone. She noted that since he was still working part-time, he clearly hadn't found a real job. She suggested he become her personal life assistant instead. Lin Yu pulled his arm away and coldly refused, saying he wasn't fit for the role. But Shin Xian persisted, claiming the job required very little effort. She explained that he would just live in her apartment near the office and take care of her daily needs for 50,000 a month. Lin Yu's eyes turned icy. He realized she was essentially asking him to be her kept man. Shin Xian smirked, saying he'd be a natural at it since his mother had been a mistress. She cruelly suggested it was in his blood. At that, Lin Yu lost his patience and violently shoved her to the ground with a cold glare. She watched him, but instead of getting angry, she simply stood up and laughed, telling him to take his time and call her whenever he changed his mind. Shin Xian left him with those words, leaving Lin Yu to offer himself a self-deprecating smile. That evening, Shin Yuchu finished work and headed to the suburbs. She arrived at the old neighborhood carrying fruit, following the address on her phone. Meanwhile, Lin Yu was observing his surroundings, noting how healthy the old madam looked. The apartment was a small 2-bedroom space, barely 60 square meters, yet it felt incredibly tidy and warm. Suddenly, the sound of running water came from the bathroom. Shin Yuchu pulled her gaze away as if she'd been struck by an electric shock. Behind her, the family doctor was about to enter, but she quickly stopped him. She told the doctor to give her the equipment and wait in the car. Shin Yuchu then efficiently checked the elderly woman's blood pressure and blood sugar. Perhaps because she had slept so well the night before, all her vitals were perfectly healthy. The old madam beamed with pride at the results. She boasted that her grandson-in-law had been taking excellent care of her. Seeing the truth for herself, Shin Yuchu finally felt at ease, though she glanced toward the bathroom. She began to pack her things, telling the grandmother that since she was fine, it was time to leave. The old madam was stunned, asking if she wouldn't stay for dinner. She insisted that the grandson-in-law's cooking was delicious, but Shin Yuchu replied it wasn't convenient. She set the medical equipment down, intending to leave it there. The old madam's eyes darted around as she insisted she take it back, claiming the boy wouldn't know how to use it and she only wanted Shin Yuchu to visit. Just as Shin Yuchu was about to respond, the water in the bathroom stopped. She immediately stood up, grabbed her medical bag, and hurried toward the door. She promised to return the next day and rushed out. At the exact moment the door clicked shut, Lin Yu stepped out of the bathroom, fully dressed. He asked where the granddaughter had gone. The old madam sighed, complaining that the girl was far too stiff and always wore such a serious expression. She asked if that was why he didn't like her, promising she could change. Lin Yu reminded her he wasn't her grandson-in-law, but she wouldn't hear it. Over the next few days, Lin Yu found the old madam to be incredibly kind and agreeable in every way, except for her stubbornness on that one particular subject. A few days later, the old madam announced she needed to go home to fetch some clothes. Lin Yu messaged the granddaughter for the address and set off. However, when he opened the location, he froze in disbelief. Manor number 1. That was the Shun family estate, the most famous luxury district in Haiqing. He had assumed the old woman lived in a modest villa and never imagined a connection to the Shuns. Upon arrival, he stared up at the magnificent, ancient gates. The black gates were carved with exquisite patterns. Lin Yu turned to the old madam, who was still half asleep, and asked if this was truly her home. The old madam looked a bit dazed, unable to recall which house was hers. Left with no choice, Lin Yu messaged the granddaughter, who replied instantly, telling them to stay put. She promised to arrive shortly. Not long after, a luxury car pulled up before them, and we see Lin Fan and Lu Li stepping out from the back seat. They rushed toward them, Lu Li's brow furrowing as she recognized him. She demanded to know what Lin Yu was doing there, having come today as Lin Fan's chaperone. acting as a sort of nanny for Lin Fan's visit to the Shin family. She had spotted someone lingering by the gates from afar. To her annoyance, it really was him. Lin Fan glared at the closed gates of the Shun estate, accusing Lin Yu of coming back to harass Miss Shin Yuchu. Upon hearing this, Lu Li lost her temper. She roared at him, calling him a beast and telling him to look at what day it was. She ordered him to get lost immediately, fearing he might ruin Lin Fan's betrothal. She threatened that she wouldn't let him off if he interfered. Although Lin Yu was utterly sick of them, he didn't want a confrontation in front of the old madam. Suppressing his impatience, he explained he was simply bringing the elderly woman home and had taken a wrong turn. Lin Fan, however, let a realization slip out. He blurted out asking if this wasn't his wife's grandmother, questioning how she could possibly live in such a neighborhood. Lin Yu shot back, asking why it was impossible. Lu Li continued her verbal assault, mocking the idea that the grandmother of his poor wife could live there. She turned her venom directly toward the old madam. She demanded the old thing tell her exactly which villa number she lived in. Lin Yu's expression darkened, but before he could speak, the old madam stood up. She suddenly remembered, announcing that she lived right here. She grabbed Lin Yu's hand and began pulling him toward the main gates of the Shun estate. The gates were still 100 meters away, but after only 2 steps, Lin Fan spoke up again. He accused Lin Yu of using the old woman as a shield to enter. Lin Yu paused, staring ahead at the magnificent entrance. Deep down, he had begun to have his suspicions the moment he saw the scale of the estate. Still, he found it impossible to connect the polite granddaughter from his messages with the cold and ruthless Shun Yuchu he knew. It seemed like a stretch. He wondered if the old madam had simply made a mistake. But just as he intended to double-check the address, Lu Li suddenly lunged forward. She tried to grab the old madam, screaming that she wouldn't let them cause trouble at the Shin house. Startled, Lin Yu moved instinctively to protect the elderly woman. He caught Lu Li's arm and shoved her away with enough force to send her stumbling back. He demanded to know what she thought she was doing. Once she regained her footing, she began shouting about his lack of filial piety, accusing him of hitting his own mother for the sake of an old thing and threatening the police. Ignoring her, Lin Yu turned his attention to the old madam. She had clearly never been insulted like this before, and we see her beginning to tremble with rage. The old madam clutched her chest, her body trembling uncontrollably. Lin Yu rushed to support her, immediately pulling a bottle of fast-acting heart medication from her pocket. However, upon opening the cap, he discovered it was empty. His pupils constricted. The elderly woman's health was fragile, and manual CPR was a risky last resort for her. Medicine was the only safe option. He looked sharply toward the estate gates, certain the Shin family would have what she needed. To be honest, they couldn't just watch her die. Even if she wasn't a Shun, she was a neighbor. He scooped the old madam into his arms, but suddenly, Lin Fan grabbed his arm with a forceful grip. Lin Fan told him not to bother, claiming the Shuns would never let him in. As she looked at the frail woman, a dark, cold glint flashed in her eyes. At that moment, Lin Yu felt a wave of absolute fury. With eyes burning with rage, he delivered a kick that sent Lin Fan tumbling to the ground. But a second later, he felt his legs being seized. Lu Li had dropped all pretense of dignity, sitting on the ground and clinging to him with all her might. Lin Yu trembled with frustration, but because he was cradling the old madam, he couldn't break free. Just then, a black Bentley slowly approached the gates. Shin Yuchu stepped out of the car and demanded to know what was happening. Lin Fan spoke up immediately, claiming Lin Yu was the one causing trouble. She accused Lin Yu of trying to use a dying old woman to extort the Shin family, blaming herself for failing to stop him. Upon hearing this, Shin Yuchu froze. When she realized the person in his arms was her own grandmother, her eyes widened in shock. She rushed toward them, as the old madam was her dearest relative. The elderly woman's health had been declining for years, and Shin Yuchu was clearly reaching a point of total panic. Lin Yu didn't have time for long explanations. He quickly explained that the old madam was having a heart attack and her medicine had run out. If she received treatment now, she would be fine. Shin Yuchu pressed her lips together, took her grandmother from him, and rushed into the estate without looking back. Lin Yu couldn't follow because Lu Li still held his legs. Lin Fan was still making snide remarks about the old madam's identity, while Lu Li finally let go, dusting herself off with a sneer. She mocked his pathetic tactics. She accused him of using a dying old thing just to force his way into the Shin house. At that moment, the gates opened, and Shin Xing stepped out. Lin Fan immediately put on a fawning smile, asking Shin Xing why she had come to the gate, instead of waiting at the parking lot. Shin Xing forced a polite smile. She claimed she was worried he might lose his way on his first visit. Then, she turned to Lin Yu, her warmth instantly replaced by a cold, sharp gaze. She asked if he had finally come to his senses. Lin Yu remained silent, his face grim. She told him to just call her next time, questioning who gave him permission to come here. She sneered, asking if an illegitimate son really thought he could enter the Shin gates. Then she added that if he truly wanted to see the inside, she might allow it. Lin Fan quickly interrupted, claiming there was a misunderstanding and that Lin Yu was actually waiting for his wife's grandmother, who had just suffered a heart attack. He explained that Shin Yuchu had carried the old woman inside for emergency treatment. Hearing this, Shin Xing's eyes reddened with sudden, sharp fury. She demanded to know who this wife was. Lin Yu looked at her with a mocking gaze, telling her that his wife's identity was none of her business. She snapped back, declaring that no one would marry him without her consent. Lin Fan chimed in, saying he heard from Lin Yu's mother that the girl was just a delinquent. Xin Xing clenched her fists, sneering that an illegitimate son and a delinquent were a perfect match. Lin Fan, of course, couldn't resist adding fuel to the fire. He suggested that Lin Yu was bitter and was intentionally harassing Xin Yuchu. Lin Yu let out a cold, disdainful laugh at Lin Fan's pathetic attempts to stir trouble. He asked Lin Fan why a supposed young master of the Lin family had a mind filled with nothing but filth and petty schemes. Lin Fan's face stiffened in anger. Lin Fan claimed he knew Lin Yu was just trying to get revenge on him and Xin Xing, but warned him not to ruin Xin Yuchu's marriage. Xin Xing was absolutely livid. She had spent the last 2 days waiting for his call, thinking she might show him mercy if he begged for forgiveness. But as it turned out, he had already found someone else to crawl to. To be honest, her ego couldn't handle the rejection. Fuming with rage, she pointed at Lin Yu and ordered the guards to remember his face and never let him set foot in the Shun estate again. Lin Fan lowered his head to hide a triumphant smirk, knowing Xin Xing had enough authority to make that ban stick. Or so he thought. However, a moment later, the Shin family butler emerged from the house. He scanned the crowd before walking straight toward Lin Yu with a respectful bow. He addressed him as Mr. Lin Yu and announced that Xin Yuchu had requested his presence inside. Lin Fan and Xin Xing stood there, completely stunned. Lin Yu looked at the guard with a faint, mocking smile and asked if he was allowed in now. The guard glanced nervously at the speechless Xin Xing. Xin Xing spat that he was likely only invited to collect the old woman, warning him to leave quickly and not to soil the Shun family's carpets. And so, we see the group enter the living room, where the old madam was sitting prominently in the main seat on the sofa. She looked quite formidable. The elderly woman glared at them, demanding to know which of them had called her a dying old thing. She was now dressed in elegant, expensive clothes. Though she still looked a bit pale, her presence was commanding. Xin Yuchu sat coldly by her side, while Lu Li and Lin Fan stood frozen in shock. Lin Fan's legs buckled, and he nearly collapsed, only staying upright because Xin Xing caught him. His hands were trembling with pure, unadulterated terror. Suddenly, Lin Fan let out a bitter laugh and asked Lin Yu why he had lied about the old madam being his wife's grandmother, leading them to be disrespectful. In an instant, we see several suspicious glares shift toward Lin Yu. Lu Li also caught on, realizing that Lin Yu had supposedly tricked an elderly woman. She accused him of taking advantage of the old madam's dementia and demanded he kneel and apologize immediately. Lin Yu's expression darkened at the accusation. It was a clever move, really, trying to shift all the blame onto him so Lin Fan could wash his hands of the entire mess. Suddenly, a loud slap echoed as the old madam insisted he was her grandson-in-law. Lu Li, enduring the pain of her burn, insisted the woman was being deceived. She claimed to be certain his wife was just a delinquent. Xin Xing's mother then intervened, suggesting they simply ask the person involved if Lin Yu was truly her husband. We watch as Lin Yu silently looks at Xin Yuchu, only to hear the expected answer. No, it seemed like a cold betrayal after everything he had done. A flash of anger crossed Lin Yu's eyes at her ingratitude, while Lin Fan looked visibly relieved, a look of joy spreading across his face. Lu Li curled her lip, claiming she knew all along that Lin Yu was the one behind this scheme. Lin Yu sneered, ready to speak, but the woman's voice rose again. Xin Yuchu explained that her grandmother had simply mistaken his identity, so she had asked Mr. Lin Yu to help look after the elderly woman for a while. The room fell into a heavy silence. No one had expected the story to take such a turn. After a moment, Lin Fan lowered his head, pretending to understand. He asked why Lin Yu hadn't told them the truth sooner to avoid such a misunderstanding. Xin Yuchu, however, remained leaning back on the sofa. Though her posture was relaxed, her aura was commanding as she asked if the Lin family truly taught their juniors to hide behind others and shirk responsibility. Prompted by those sharp words, the old madam grew furious, asking if they all truly thought her mind had gone completely soft. She looked at Xin Xing and demanded the engagement be called off, refusing to accept such a man as a grandson-in-law. Lin Fan began to tremble violently. He couldn't let the marriage he had worked so hard for vanish like smoke. He looked toward Xin Xing, but she seemed completely drained of energy. She was clearly still reeling from the shock of hearing that Lin Yu might be married. Lin Fan clenched his fists and walked toward her with his head bowed. He apologized for his mistake, promising that even if the marriage was cancelled, he would still introduce her to the person he had mentioned. Xin Xing finally snapped out of her daze, realizing that Lin Fan still intended to help her with the introduction to the powerful contact. That contact was none other than the influential figure known as Yubo. The atmosphere in the room remained thick with tension as everyone waited for the next move. Xin Xing felt that since things had already progressed this far, it wouldn't be right to back out now. The old madam gave him a long, piercing look and told him to do as he pleased. She noted that her great-granddaughter's affairs were for her parents to decide, as she didn't wish to interfere. However, Xin Xing's mother smiled and asked if the grandmother had forgotten the meeting gift. Upon hearing this, the old madam's eyelids drooped slightly as she stated she would have 18,000 transferred to Xin Xing. At this, the mother's expression froze instantly. She stammered, reminding the elderly woman that she had previously promised the young couple a 2% share of the company to help with their new life. To be honest, her greed was showing. If we were to ask who the wealthiest person in the Shin family is, it would undoubtedly be the old madam. Born into a prestigious Kyoto family, she possessed a massive dowry of her own. She controlled 20% of the Shun family shares, and Shin Xing's mother had long planned to use this marriage to secure a massive fortune. Everything had been settled beforehand. But now, the old madam had changed her mind at the last second. She looked at her daughter-in-law with a half-smile, stating that since she wasn't satisfied with this grandson-in-law, the gift was gone. Lin Fan's face turned deathly pale, feeling utterly humiliated by the rejection. With so many servants around, he knew this conversation would surely spread like wildfire. Soon, all of Haiqing would know he had been snubbed by the matriarch. In high society, reputation is everything, and the old madam had just ground his pride into the dirt. But the little old lady didn't care about that at all. After dropping that bombshell, she simply took hold of Lin Yu and led him, along with Shin Yuchu, toward her private courtyard. Once there, she made a quick excuse to leave, telling Shin Yuchu to properly entertain her grandson-in-law. She hurried away with her attendants, leaving them alone. In the blink of an eye, the courtyard was empty except for Lin Yu and Shin Yuchu. We see them standing side by side under the cover of the night. Just as Lin Yu was hesitating on how to start the conversation, Shin Yuchu suddenly looked at him. She remarked coldly that he seemed to have a weak constitution and lacked any real backbone. Not one to be intimidated, Lin Yu looked back at her with equal seriousness and called her a silly girl. Shin Yuchu's face turned grim with shock that her grandmother had shared even that nickname. She told herself his intentions couldn't be pure. While her grandmother's attachment to him might have been an accident, she suspected there was a deeper scheme at play. She worried this man had only taken the elderly woman in because she had accidentally revealed her wealthy identity. Lin Yu gave her a sharp retort, but he hadn't forgotten his main goal. He reminded her of her text message promising a favor, asking if she would go to the Civil Affairs Bureau to check his marital status. Shin Yuchu's expression darkened further. She impatiently agreed to go, but warned him that if the marriage wasn't real, he should stop using her grandmother to save himself from trouble. It was a harsh ultimatum, really. Suddenly, the little old lady's head popped out from a nearby window. She shouted at her granddaughter, asking if she was bullying her grandson-in-law again. Shin Yuchu's expression stiffened immediately. Dinner was a simple affair of 4 dishes and a soup, just enough for the 3 of them, but the little old lady seemed troubled. The old madam had no appetite, putting down her chopsticks after only a few bites. She turned to Lin Yu, calling him grandson-in-law and asking to go home. Shin Yuchu urged her to stay and rest, noting that this small courtyard was like a mini nursing home, fully equipped with medical machines. Yet, the old lady remained anxious. She gripped Lin Yu's hand tightly, asking if he could stay and keep her company. He frowned, glancing at Shin Yuchu, feeling uneasy about leaving the old lady alone. However, he knew this woman despised him, suspecting him of using her grandmother to get close to her. Surely, she would never agree to let him stay. After finishing the meal, Lin Yu helped the old madam back to her room. She was truly exhausted after the day's drama and fell into a heavy, dizzy sleep almost immediately. Her sleep was restless, leaving Lin Yu with no choice but to sit by the bed and watch over her. Outside the window, Shin Yuchu watched with a solemn expression. She asked the family doctor what was happening. The doctor, who had studied psychology, sighed, admitting she didn't know why the old madam was so fixated on this boy. But she could guess why the elderly woman was so anxious, fearing her grandson-in-law might leave. It was a deep-seated insecurity, clearly. The doctor glanced at Shin Yuchu, explaining that the old madam likely felt she wouldn't survive the year. She feared that once she was gone, her granddaughter would have no ties left. To her, this grandson-in-law was the only person she could leave behind to stay by Shin Yuchu's side. The young woman froze, her dark eyes swirling with suppressed emotions. After a long silence, her gaze returned to a cold calm. She stood in the moonlight, looking as though she might vanish into the surrounding darkness at any moment. Eventually, she turned and strode toward the main house. Meanwhile, we see that Lin Fan was having a very difficult time finishing his own dinner. Because they had just lost that 2% share, Xin Xing's mother, Lu Meijian, was furious, her words sharp and full of hidden thorns. She mocked Lin Fan, asking why he couldn't please the old madam when even an illegitimate son like Lin Yu managed to do it. Lin Fan could only lower his head. He apologized, admitting he wasn't as sweet-talking as Lin Yu. Lu Meijian sneered, telling him she didn't care how he did it. He had to get those shares back. She warned him that if he failed, he could forget about joining the Shin family. Lin Fan suffered in silence, and as soon as dinner ended, he prepared to leave. But before he could depart, Shin Yuchu returned, bringing a heavy, oppressive aura into the room. She looked absolutely displeased. She glanced at the leftovers on the table, her face darkening further. Her grandmother hadn't eaten a thing, yet here they were, enjoying a pleasant family dinner. Lu Meijian saw her expression and didn't dare speak. It was Xin Xing's father, Xin Yuanjia, who finally frowned and asked what was wrong. Why are you here? Shin Yuanjie asked, but Shin Yuchu ignored her uncle entirely, her sharp gaze landing instead on Lin Fan. Since the engagement hadn't been broken, she reasoned, he was technically part of the Shin family, wasn't he? And if he was family, he had to follow their rules. For defying his elders today, his punishment was to kneel in the ancestral hall all night. Without another word, Shin Yuchu gestured to the men behind her. Two bodyguards immediately stepped toward Lin Fan, their presence making it clear that this wasn't a request. Young Master Lin, if you please, they said. Lin Fan looked to Shin Xing for help, but saw that his fiancée didn't dare challenge the authority of the family's true power player. He took a deep breath, realizing he had no choice but to follow the bodyguards out of the room. To be honest, his evening was about to get much worse. And so, Lin Fan spent the night at the Shin estate. Once they reached the ancestral hall, the guards informed him that since he wasn't officially married yet, he wasn't allowed inside. He was told to kneel outside on the hard blue brick floor instead. Lin Fan tried to protest, but the two bodyguards simply stood with their hands behind their backs, watching him coldly. It was a freezing night, and Lin Fan soon found himself shivering uncontrollably. The biting cold seemed to seep through the cracks in the stone and straight into his knees. He considered slacking off for a moment, but the guards stood over him like silent door gods. They didn't say a word, which, naturally, made the whole situation even more terrifying. The next morning, Lin Yu woke up to find himself lying comfortably in a bed, covered by a small pink blanket. The room's decor didn't quite match the old madam's usual style. He didn't dwell on it. However, after washing up, we see him joining the old madam and Shun Yuchu for breakfast, where a plate of fried sugar cakes sat in the center of the table. The old madam immediately reached for one, but Shun Yuchu stopped her. She reminded her grandmother that such oily, high-sugar foods were terrible for her blood sugar levels. As Shun Yuchu wondered how to keep the stubborn woman from eating it, Lin Yu spoke up calmly, telling the grandmother that the cake really wasn't suitable for her. To everyone's surprise, the greedy and usually headstrong old lady actually listened, placing the cake into Lin Yu's bowl instead. She gave him a fawning smile, calling him her grandson-in-law. "I'm giving this to you," she chirped. Shin Yuchu watched them with a scrutinizing gaze, unable to fathom why her grandmother was suddenly so obedient toward this man. Lin Yu ate the sugar cake without any hesitation before turning his attention to Shin Yuchu. He reminded her that they needed to head to the Civil Affairs Bureau with her ID and household register. The old madam asked curiously why they were going there, and Lin Yu lied, claiming their marriage certificate had been lost. But his plan backfired almost immediately. "It's not lost," the old lady exclaimed. She hurried into the bedroom and quickly returned, holding 2 red marriage certificates which she proudly handed over to Lin Yu and Shin Yuchu. Lin Yu stared at the certificates in his hand, completely stunned. He suddenly realized that the old madam had known they were married from the very first moment she saw him. It felt as though he had finally stumbled upon a vital clue. He looked at her, asking urgently how she had come to possess these marriage certificates in the first place. The little old lady froze, her eyes becoming a bit dazed as she admitted she couldn't remember. He pressed her, asking how he and Miss Shun had gotten married in the first place. The old lady continued to shake her head, her memory failing her. Lin Yu felt a surge of urgency, pleading with her to try and remember, but Shin Yuchu cut him off with a sharp cry. She stepped directly between him and the old lady, her eyes cold and indifferent as she looked at him. She asked if, now that the certificates were proven real, he planned to skip the bureau entirely. She accused him of having a hidden agenda, suggesting that his talk of going to the Civil Affairs Bureau was just a dignified way to keep pestering her. It was a bold accusation, implying that his every move was calculated to keep him entangled in her life. Lin Yu found the whole thing absurd. He told her that not going today was fine, as a divorce wasn't something that could be settled in a single visit after 2 years of marriage. Since they were legally husband and wife, there were complex property divisions to handle and a divorce agreement to sign first. But Shin Yuchu wasn't having it. She stared at him intently after speaking, but when she saw him simply shrug with a look of helpless resignation, she began to wonder. To be honest, she couldn't tell if he was acting. She suddenly felt a flicker of doubt about whether the marriage certificates were actually real. Shaking it off, she grabbed the documents and headed for the door first. She told him she'd be waiting in the parking lot. After giving the old lady a reassuring smile, Lin Yu followed, only to find Lu Li supporting a very pale-looking Lin Fan near the cars. The moment she saw him, she rushed over with an air of self-righteousness, demanding that he help his brother. She reminded him that even as an illegitimate son, the Lin family had raised him. She insisted that even if he didn't value their love, he should respect the effort it took to raise him and repay the family. These were the same brainwashing tactics he had endured for 20 years. Now, those words only struck him as laughable. Seeing that he wasn't responding, Lu Li took the opportunity to say that now that he was grown, he finally had a chance to pay them back. She pointed out how the old madam seemed to listen to him and suggested he convince her to return that 2% share of the company to his brother, Lin Fan. Hearing this, Lin Yu couldn't help but laugh. He asked her why a lowly, illegitimate son like himself would ever have the power to influence the old madam's decisions. Lu Li was stunned and tried to say more, but he had already strode past her and climbed into Shun Yuchu's car. Soon enough, they arrived at the Civil Affairs Bureau. Just as they parked, Lu Chang came rushing up behind them in a panic. He gasped out that the driver told him the boss had driven off alone, which had scared him into tracking her location. He asked if something was wrong, noting how Shin Yuchu was usually a woman of few words. He wondered aloud if Lin Yu's pestering had finally made her paranoid enough to come here. He assured her that he had promised she would never have to see that man again, or else he would eat his words on a live stream. From the back seat, Lin Yu spoke up in a lazy tone. He asked which streaming channel he should tune into. Lu Chang's entire body went stiff with shock, and just like that, the three of them headed inside to handle the business at hand. Inside the hall, Lu Chang took the lead, asking if it was possible to obtain a certificate without both parties present. The answer, of course, was a firm no. The staff member's response was definitive. Lu Chang turned to Lin Yu with a mocking sneer, accusing him of preparing fake documents and threatening to call the police. He wanted to report him for forgery and harassment, but Shin Yuchu ignored him, calmly handing over the documents to ask if the marriage certificates were authentic. After a quick search, the staff member gave their reply. The certificates were genuine. Lu Chang gasped in disbelief, suggesting there must be a mistake in their records. The staff member shut that down immediately, noting that marriage is a serious matter requiring identity verification and signed affidavits from both parties. Lin Yu quickly spoke up, asking if they could see those signed affidavits. Shin Yuchu nodded in agreement, requesting the documents as well. The staff member sighed as they stood up, noting that for a couple in conflict, they certainly had a strange sense of synchronicity. A moment later, they returned. 2 registration files were placed before them. Lin Yu took one look and confirmed the handwriting was indeed his own. Lu Chang leaned in, his voice cracking. He cried out, asking his boss if that was truly her signature. Shin Yuchu remained silent, while Lin Yu turned back to the staff to ask for the security footage. Unfortunately, we learned that the Bureau only keeps recordings for 6 months. The staff member assured them once more that there was no way to bypass the rules. Both people had to be there in person to finalize the registration. As the three of them walked out of the Bureau, Lu Chang looked utterly lost. He asked what they should do now. Shin Yuchu's eyes darkened with thought, while Lin Yu simply raised an eyebrow and suggested a divorce. They spoke the word in perfect unison. Lu Chang blinked, then asked if they should discuss the terms of the separation right then and there. Both Lin Yu and Shin Yuchu replied at the exact same time again, stating that their respective lawyers would handle the negotiations. Lin Yu chuckled at the coincidence, suggesting they each have their lawyers draft an agreement first. Lu Chang scoffed, doubting Lin Yu could even afford a lawyer. Shin Yuchu, however, nodded her approval. Ignoring Lu Chang's jab, Lin Yu pulled out his phone and asked to add her on WeChat for easier communication. With a meaningful look, Shin Yuchu opened her QR code. As soon as he scanned it, a chat box popped up, revealing the contact name he had saved for her. The note read, "Silly granddaughter," and her face instantly went dark. Lin Yu felt a wave of embarrassment. He had completely forgotten they were already connected. Facing her icy glare, he coughed and explained it was just a random name from before. He quickly changed it to Silly Girl and bid her a hasty farewell. As he drove away, he placed a call to Gu. He told her to find the best divorce lawyer available, as he couldn't afford any mistakes now. He warned her not to let the woman take a single cent. Gu asked how the marriage even happened, wondering if they both had amnesia, which made Lin Yu sigh. We see him realize that one person must know the truth, old Madam Shun. He frowned, knowing the clinical trials for the Alzheimer's medication had to be accelerated. If they didn't hurry, it would be too late. Returning home, he found the little old lady waiting at the door with a suitcase, calling out to her grandson-in-law. She announced she had brought plenty of clothes. Lin Yu paused, a helpless smile crossing his face. That same day, the most famous law firm in Haicheng received a surprise. 2 anonymous requests arrived with identical demands. The other party must not receive a single penny. To be honest, the coincidence was almost poetic. The assistant lawyer complained about never seeing such a heartless couple, but the lead lawyer just chuckled. 1 contract, double the profit. It was time to send it to the clients. Shortly after, Shin Yuchu received the divorce agreement in her office. Just as she opened it, Lu Chang pushed the door open with news of his investigation. He reported that Lin Yu only discovered the marriage a few days ago when he went to register. As for Shin Yuchu herself, her records after leaving the Lin family were a mystery. Years of information were missing, which was very strange indeed. Shin Yuchu grew thoughtful, wondering if this meant the woman was deeply involved in the scheme. Her motives remained unknown, and to make matters worse, they still hadn't contacted the elusive researcher, Shin Chu, which, naturally, was quite a setback. Shin Yuchu remained silent, unaware that the Alzheimer's drug she sought was the very one Lin Yu was developing. That evening, she asked him to meet her downstairs. She handed him the agreement, stating she had no objections and telling him to sign. She expected a fight, but he signed without a moment's hesitation. He thought to himself that tomorrow wasn't a moment too soon, as his company was waiting to go public. They agreed to meet at the Civil Affairs Bureau in the morning. Just then, old Madam Shun came downstairs, her face pale and her voice trembling as she asked if they were truly getting a divorce. The shock was visible. As soon as the words left her lips, her eyes closed and she collapsed. Later, at the hospital, the doctor warned them sternly that she could not handle any more stress. They were told under no circumstances should she be angered again. Shin Yuchu sat on the bench, her hands trembling uncontrollably as she waited for news. When the old lady finally woke up, she looked at Lin Yu and asked in a raspy voice if her dream about the divorce was real. It was a heartbreaking sight, really. Lin Yu found himself unable to speak, caught between the truth and the old woman's fragile health. The old lady turned her gaze back to him, asking if what the girl said was true. Remembering the doctor's orders, he paused for a long moment before saying it was just a dream. That night, as he sat on the sofa reviewing English research data, a message popped up from Silly Girl. Shin Yuchu was asking about her grandmother's condition. He replied that they could wait until her health stabilized before divorcing, noting that per their agreement, they would remain independent. Just then, another message arrived from Shin Yuchu. She asked if he had any other demands, and he simply stated they should divorce as soon as the old lady recovered. Suddenly, the little old lady looked between them and spoke up. She insisted on arranging a job for her grandson-in-law at the Shin Group. After a brief pause, Shin Yuchu reluctantly agreed to the request. The old lady excitedly told him to go to work with her granddaughter the next day, and he accepted. After all, the Shin Group's database would be perfect for his research. Later, as Shin Yuchu left with Lu Chong, the assistant complained in the hallway. He was convinced Lin Yu was just trying to infiltrate the company and wondered why she agreed. Shin Yuchu replied coldly that if she didn't keep him where she could see him, the fox's tail would never show. It was a classic case of keeping one's enemies closer. Back in the hospital room, the old lady beckoned him over to share a secret. She told him that if the girl ever bullied him, he should fight back. She whispered that despite her granddaughter's tough and untouchable act, she was actually terrified of cats. Lin Yu froze, a memory of a girl from his childhood surfacing. He remembered an older girl he knew back then who was also afraid of cats. The old lady then asked him if he preferred cats or dogs. He realized that he used to like cats, but because that girl didn't, he had stopped liking them too. Soon enough, he understood why the old lady had asked that question. The next day, on the top floor of the Shin Group, an adorable Shiba Inu puppy was wagging its tail and circling around him. Lu Chong was utterly speechless. He couldn't fathom why the old lady had assigned Lin Yu the job of taking care of a puppy. Even Shin Yuchu found the situation a bit difficult to understand. The idea that his job was essentially playing with a dog was quite absurd, really. She eventually ordered them to take him to the first group of the new energy R&D department. This was her plan all along. The R&D department was vital to the group's future, and placing him there was a test to see if he would slip up. Lin Yu didn't mind at all, picking up the puppy and following Lu Chong. When asked if the dog had a name, he was told the old lady wanted him to choose one. He glanced at the grumpy-faced Shin Yuchu and decided to name the dog Kitten. As they reached the 38th floor, Lu Chong began to lecture him in the elevator. He pointed out that most employees in the R&D department held doctorates, and even the lowest-ranking staff were graduates from prestigious universities. He noted that Lin Yu was the first undergraduate there and told him to learn well from his seniors. Apparently, this was a special arrangement made by the boss. He added that there was no need for gratitude, as this was simply a reward for keeping the old lady happy. Lin Yu's lip twitched. To be honest, this was all quite unnecessary. Finally, Lu Chong reminded him that their relationship must remain a secret to avoid any public scandal when the divorce eventually happened. He gave the man a look that suggested he shared the same annoyance. Lu Chong was stunned. This man actually had the nerve to look down on the boss on his very first day. The morning was easy enough, as no one assigned him any real work. He was happy to relax, playing with the puppy in the office until the little dog finally fell asleep. After closing the door, he headed straight for the archives on the 60th floor. He knew that only by creating a cure for Alzheimer's could the old lady truly recover. Only then, when she remembered the past, would he understand the truth behind this mysterious marriage. We see that these archives cover top-tier knowledge from every imaginable field. Some of these research materials were things one could never find in the outside world. Deep down, he felt a spark of excitement. Meanwhile, on the top floor, Shin Yuchu received a text. The old lady had even changed her profile name to Grandma, who must not be provoked. The message was blunt. "You brat, you must have lunch with my grandson-in-law today." She demanded a photo of them dining intimately together. With a helpless sigh, Shin Yuchu pressed the call button and told Lu Chong to bring up 2 lunches. She sent him a message, but there was no reply for a long time. We returned to the 60th floor, where he was searching behind rows of bookshelves. He was so absorbed in his search for books that he didn't notice someone watching him. As he stepped backward, he suddenly bumped into another person. He offered a quick apology, only to turn around and find Shin Xian staring at him with a complex expression. She asked if all his effort to please the old lady was just to get close to her. His expression turned cold in an instant as he told her that his business had absolutely nothing to do with her. She mocked the lowly job he had been given, but he simply chuckled. He asked if her logic meant she had been shallow for chasing him for so long back then. Shin Xian's eyes turned red as she claimed she knew he hated her for proposing to Lin Fan. She insisted she had no choice, as wealthy families must consider many things. She explained that her mother would never agree to her being with a commoner, regardless of his qualities. She claimed she could never marry an illegitimate son. She worried about her status in the Shin family and feared becoming the laughingstock of Haiqing. He simply looked away and thanked her for the blessing of not marrying him. As he tried to leave, Shin Xian blocked his path. She offered to arrange a position for him in her group, promising to find experts to mentor him. She knew he was ambitious and clever, believing he would learn quickly. He interrupted her rambling to ask what the catch was. Her answer was simple: he had to get a divorce. She wanted him all to herself, unable to stand the thought of another woman sharing him. He coldly replied that she simply wasn't worthy of such a thing. She demanded to know why he loved his thug wife so much. She even threatened to pay her off or have her intimidated into abandoning him, claiming the woman couldn't compare to her. He looked at Shun Xin with utter indifference. To be honest, he had no desire to crush her self-esteem, but she was certainly making it difficult. Since she insisted on getting to the bottom of it, he told her plainly. His wife was more beautiful and had a far better figure than she ever would. She picked up her phone and called Lin Fan, asking if he was still dining with Dr. Yu tomorrow afternoon and demanding he take her along. Meanwhile, Shun Yuchu used lunch as an excuse to bring him up to the top floor, pointing toward the dining table as they entered her office. She told him to eat first while she finished some work. Deep down, she felt a bit guilty, hoping he hadn't overheard her earlier remark. Just then, we hear the sound of a camera shutter as Shun Yuchu calmly took a photo to send to Grandma before walking over. He knew exactly why she was taking the picture, so he didn't ask, simply commenting that her lunch looked quite extravagant to break the silence. The woman sat down across from him with elegant poise, noting that proper nutrition was the only way to maintain a good figure. He froze, his face turning a shade of red as his gaze brushed past her fair skin. Awkwardly, he began packing up a portion of the food. He claimed he suddenly remembered the puppy hadn't been fed and made a quick exit, thanking her for the meal as he left with the lunchbox. After work, Shin Yuchu called Grandma to check on her, only to find she was still at the hospital claiming her chest pains had returned. The old lady was clearly up to something, asking the girl if she would be coming back tonight, to stay by her bedside once again. Shin Yuchu rubbed her temples, seeing right through Grandma's little scheme, and sent him a message saying she would pick him up for the hospital. He replied instantly, telling her not to bother as he was already in a taxi. Though she wanted distance, his eagerness to avoid her felt strangely irritating. We see him entering the inpatient department carrying the puppy, just as Madame Lin was finishing a follow-up exam nearby. Lin Fan supported her arm as Madame Lin hesitated, wondering aloud if that was Lin Yu and why he was at the hospital. Lin Fan felt a surge of secret annoyance that the old lady refused all visitors except for Lin Yu, though his eyes flickered with a hidden thought. He suggested Lin Yu was likely visiting old Madame Shun out of filial piety, but the Nanny Nan, gave a disdainful snort at the idea. The nanny grumbled that he had never once visited Madame Lin, calling him an ungrateful wolf who had likely forgotten his own family already. Lin Fan added that Shin Yuchu had supposedly found him a job at the Shun group, suggesting his devotion to the old lady was merely a repayment. Nanning scoffed that Madame Lin had raised him, yet he showed no gratitude for a kindness greater than heaven. Madame Lin finally told her to stop. Lin Fan let out a performative sigh, noting that while his mother was kind, some people actually knew how to repay a drop of water with a fountain, like Dr. Yu. He reminded her that despite only receiving a small sponsorship, Dr. Yu had helped their family immensely, even saving the company from bankruptcy 3 years ago. By providing a technical patent, she had turned their crisis into safety. Nanny Nan nodded, agreeing that Dr. Yu was far superior to Lin Yu. Lin Fan then expressed his own curiosity about Dr. Yu, asking his mother to take him along tomorrow. Madame Lin smiled and patted his head affectionately. We see this entire scene unfolding through the eyes of Lin Yu, who was watching from the sofa of the VIP ward as Madame Lin walked away. He noticed her complexion was an unhealthy shade of pale, while Lin Fan whispered in her ear, eventually coaxing a reluctant nod from his mother. The two shared an intimate moment before their car departed, and only then did Lin Yu finally look away, only to find Grandma standing right behind him. The old lady curiously asked who that person was, claiming she looked familiar. Just as he was about to answer with a gentle smile, her eyes lit up. She suddenly remembered, exclaiming that the woman was his mother because they looked so much alike. This gave him a moment of pause. In truth, their features weren't that similar, save for a certain cold, elegant aura that seemed identical, a result of him subconsciously mimicking her style for years. He had adopted her poise after leaving the Lin family, but he simply looked at Grandma and softly told her that the woman wasn't his mother. Grandma, however, was absolutely certain, scolding him for not recognizing his own parent. He could only offer a helpless smile at her stubbornness. Fortunately, Shen Yuchu arrived at the door with a lavish dinner and 3 servings of fruit to break the tension of the moment. But the moment Grandma saw the fruit, she frowned, warning that her grandson-in-law couldn't eat mangoes because he was allergic to them. He was struck with a sudden shock, staring at her in disbelief. He had indeed been allergic once, but he had undergone desensitization 2 years ago. He had never mentioned this to her, yet Grandma laughed, claiming he had told her long ago that eating mangoes made his face break out in bumps. His expression turned serious as he asked her exactly when he had told her that. Grandma looked confused, suggesting it was perhaps before the wedding. A storm of questions raced through his mind, as he was certain he hadn't even known her before the marriage. He urgently asked what else she remembered. He pressed her for details on how he and Shin Yuchu had actually gotten their marriage certificate, but Grandma simply shook her head, unable to recall. We see the coldness in her expression, and he knew she likely suspected him of some hidden agenda, a misunderstanding he couldn't seem to wash away. He picked up the Shiba Inu, telling Grandma and the others to eat while he took the dog for a walk, but he simply lingered at the end of the hallway. Not long after, Shin Yuchu followed him out, asking if he had something to say. He had expected her to demand an explanation for the confusion. He answered earnestly that he truly had no idea about the pre-marriage events Grandma mentioned, noting that an old lady couldn't simply invent such private details. He expected her to doubt him, but she responded with a calm that caught him off guard, leading him to ask if she actually believed him. Shin Yuchu took a step closer, her voice turning icy as she told Lin Yu that regardless of his goals, if he kept Grandma happy, she would protect him. He realized then that she didn't care about the truth. As long as Grandma was smiling, she was willing to overlook any schemes he might have. With an imposing aura, she added a sharp warning. If he ever hurt Grandma, she would ensure he had no place left in the city of Haicheng. He let out a cold laugh, pointing out that she had already started doing just that. Shin Yuchu frowned, but before she could speak, Professor Wen appeared. The professor walked over, his voice raspy as he told Lin Yu he was just about to call him to check on his job search and the misunderstanding. He remarked that Shin Yuchu had been quite heartless, going so far as to unfairly cancel Lin Yu's postgraduate recommendation over a petty grudge. He even mentioned her threat to make Lin Yu vanish from Haicheng. Shin Yuchu looked on in confusion, while Lin Yu watched her with a mocking smile. He reassured the professor that it was all resolved, claiming Shin Yuchu was actually quite kind and had even offered him a job and her protection. Shin Yuchu's face darkened at the irony, but Professor Wen sighed in relief before turning his attention toward her with a sudden realization. He instinctively asked if this was the thug wife Lin Yu had mentioned. At that moment, Shin Yuchu's expression went completely black. Lin Yu's smile only widened as he confirmed it, while the professor earnestly advised the young woman to find a decent job since she was so pretty. Meanwhile, at the Lin family dinner table, Lin Jinan noticed Madame Lin had no appetite and worriedly asked if she was feeling unwell. Lin Fan chimed in, explaining to his father that they had run into Lin Yu at the hospital and that their mother was likely worried about him. Lin Fan sighed, feigning concern that Lin Yu hated him and might say something to old Mrs. Shun that would cause Shin Yuchu to take it out on him. Lin Jinan scoffed, stating that if Lin Yu offended the young miss, it had nothing to do with Lin Fan. Just as he spoke, the conversation shifted. Suddenly, Lin Jinan's phone rang. It was Lu Chang, Shin Yuchu's special assistant, and Jinan quickly asked what the young miss required. The voice on the other end was icy, asking when exactly Lin Fan had decided to make Lin Yu disappear from Haicheng on the boss's behalf. The assistant dryly noted that the boss herself had no idea she'd made such a threat. Lin Jinan froze, looking at Lin Fan in disbelief. Lu Chang left him with a final warning that the Lin family should learn to discipline their children before hanging up abruptly. Lin Fan lowered his head, claiming he only said it because he saw Lin Yu pestering Shin Yuchu and feared it would ruin his own marriage prospects. With a pale face, Lin Fan argued that since Lin Yu was also his father's son, he feared Jinan wouldn't have the heart to scold him properly. Lin Jinan dismissed the notion immediately, declaring that in his heart, he only had one son and Lin Yu was nothing compared to Lin Fan. Madame Lin, however, disagreed, softly reminding Jinan that Lin Yu was still his flesh and blood, but her husband turned to her sharply. He told Shirya that because he was once tricked by Lu Li, he would never acknowledge her son. His heart belonged only to her and Lin Fan. Standing nearby in her nanny's uniform, Lu Li heard these words and clenched her fists in a surge of hidden resentment. She looked at Lin Jinan with bitterness. This was the man she loved, her childhood friend, yet his heart only beat for Li Shirya. Years ago, when she brought her positive pregnancy test to him and offered to be his mistress, he had heartlessly cast her aside. He had told her then that he would never betray his wife, leaving Lu Li with no choice but to find Li Shirya herself. She had orchestrated a plan so deep that the truth remained buried for decades. It was a secret she guarded with a cold, calculating patience. Lin Jinan would never know that the boy he had cherished as his and Shirya's son for all these years was actually Lu Li's child. As for Lin Yu, she felt he deserved to be ignored and suppressed. Meanwhile, Madame Lin stubbornly insisted that the family owed Lin Yu an apology. Lin Jinan scoffed at the idea, asking why his precious son should ever have to apologize to the son of a woman like Lu Li. Lu Li herself quickly chimed in, saying it wasn't necessary, as the Lin family's upbringing was a debt Lin Yu could never fully repay. Madame Lin sighed and stopped arguing, but later, when Lin Fan escorted her back to her room, she decided to speak her mind once more. Madame Lin told Lin Fan that if he had time tomorrow, she would take him to apologize to Lin Yu in person, causing Lin Fan's expression to freeze instantly. She suggested they meet with Shen Xing and Dr. Yu together. Lin Fan's eyes lit up as he hugged her arm, praising her for being so good to him. Once he left, Madame Lin turned to her old servant, Nanny Nan, sighing that her poor health had led to her failing to discipline Lin Fan properly over the years. Nanny Nan reassured her that Lin Fan was filial and attentive, and any small flaws could be corrected, but Madame Lin only offered a bitter smile. She noted that Lin Yu never spoke up for himself before she began coughing violently, leaning on Nanny Nan as that heavy secret continued to weigh on her. We returned to the next morning, where Lin Yu woke up feeling quite nervous, as it had been 10 years since he last faced Madame Lin. He wondered if she would be happy or angry to see him. By noon, the old lady insisted that Shin Yuchu escort him home to change his clothes. As the two of them left the ward and headed downstairs, they ran into Lu Chong, who received a polite nod from Shin Yuchu as he approached. Lu Chong handed Lin Yu a piece of paper, asking him to look over a list of famous domestic professors specializing in new energy. Lin Yu looked at him with confusion as Lu Chong explained these were even more prestigious than Professor Wen, and he could choose any for his master's degree. This was the boss's compensation for his cancelled recommendation. Lu Chong remarked that meeting their boss was actually a blessing in disguise for him. Lin Yu's mouth twitched as he declined, leading Lu Chong to frown and ask if he was still set on studying under the elusive Dr. Yu. He warned that Dr. Yu was currently the most sought-after genius and only accepted other geniuses, suggesting Lin Yu might not even catch his eye. He advised Lin Yu not to be so ambitious and perhaps wait until after his master's to seek out Dr. Yu for a doctorate instead. Lin Yu looked at him as if he were a fool before telling Shin Yuchu that he would simply take a taxi home by himself. As Shin Yuchu watched him walk away, she suddenly instructed Lu Chong to help Lin Yu get in touch with Dr. Yu after all, leaving the assistant stunned. Meanwhile, at the entrance of a private restaurant, Madame Lin arrived early with Lin Fan and Xin Xing, who pushed open the door to their private room. They saw the tall silhouette of a man pouring tea. Xin Xing introduced herself as being from the Shun group, eager to meet the famous Dr. Yu. When the man turned around, Xin Xing's face filled with shock as she demanded to know why Lin Yu was there, to which he lazily replied that he should be asking her. He told her not to worry as he wasn't there for her, but when she demanded to know where Dr. Yu was, he remained silent as Madame Lin and Lin Fan entered. Upon seeing him, Madame Lin's eyes welled with tears as she whispered his name. Lin Yu felt a stir in his heart as he asked if she had been well lately. She replied that she was fine, but immediately asked how he was doing, having heard from his father that he was married, all while holding his hand tightly. A dark glint flashed in Lin Fan's eyes as he spoke up, suggesting that while they should have invited Lin Yu to dine, his job as a waiter made it inconvenient. He even offered to give him a large tip later as a subsidy, earning a sharp reprimand from Madame Lin, who then turned back to Lin Yu with concern. She explained they were there to meet the famous Dr. Yu and encouraged Lin Yu, as a new energy student himself, to stay and make a useful connection. Fearing that Lin Yu might steal his resources, Lin Fan picked up a cup of scalding tea and approached him, claiming he wanted to apologize for yesterday. He offered a toast with the tea, but then accidentally let the cup slip toward Lin Yu. However, our protagonist was far too quick for such a clumsy trick. Lin Yu stepped aside and bumped the cup back toward Lin Fan, splashing the hot tea onto him and causing the young man to cry out in staged agony. Lin Fan cried out in a grievance, claiming he knew Lin Yu hated him but couldn't believe he would go this far, while Xin Xing stepped in with a glare. She demanded to know if this was how he treated guests as a waiter, threatening to call the manager, even as Madame Lin tried to protect Lin Yu. Madame Lin insisted they were all family, but Lin Fan urged her to send Lin Yu away before Xin Xing got even angrier and more conflict erupted. With a look of deep guilt, Madame Lin told Lin Yu to visit home more often, promising to introduce him to Dr. Yu another time as Lin Fan changed the subject. Lin Fan impatiently asked why the doctor hadn't arrived yet, to which Lin Yu replied with a faint, knowing smile that he was already there. The three of them stared at him in confusion, but before Madame Lin could ask what he meant, she began coughing violently and collapsed onto the table. Lin Yu instinctively moved to help her, but Lin Fan shoved him away, screaming at him to get lost and demanding to know what he'd done to their mother. The ambulance arrived quickly, but as Lin Yu tried to board, Xin Xing grabbed him, warning the illegitimate son to stay far away from Madame Lin. He took a taxi to the hospital anyway, finding the corridors packed with people and not a single empty bed available for the suffering woman. From the floor above, Shin Yuchu witnessed the chaotic scene and quietly instructed Lu Chong to arrange a private room for the Lin family. When the receptionist announced that a VIP ward had just opened up, Lin Fan was overjoyed, assuming it was all thanks to Xin Xing's influence. Xin Xing silently took credit for the favor as the group moved into the room, while Lin Fan blocked the door, telling Lin Yu his mother needed peace. He told Lin Yu not to disturb her recovery, and with a sharp bang, the door slammed shut. Lin Yu stood there, heart burning with anxiety, yet feeling he had no right to enter. He could only take a seat on a nearby bench. Not long after, a rush of hurried footsteps echoed through the hall as Lin Jinan rushed into the room, his face etched with worry. After confirming that Madame Lin was out of immediate danger, Lin Jinan pulled Lin Fan out of the room and asked with a deep frown what had happened. He demanded to know why she had suddenly collapsed. Lin Fan glanced at Lin Yu and claimed it was because Lin Yu insisted on meeting Dr. Yu and had argued with Xin Xing. He lied, saying the stress of the argument had upset their mother. Lin Jinan immediately turned a furious gaze toward Lin Yu and, without a word, swung his arm to strike him. Lin Yu didn't even try to dodge, his mind still filled with the image of Madame Lin's pale face. Perhaps, as Lin Fan said, his very presence was a misfortune for her. The expected pain never came. When he opened his eyes, he saw a cool, elegant figure standing firmly in front of him, shielding him from the blow. Shin Yuchu stood there, as if holding up the sky for him. Lin Jinan, caught off guard and flustered, stammered, asking what Miss Shin was doing. She calmly noted that while she shouldn't interfere in a father disciplining his son, her grandmother was quite fond of him and would be upset to see him injured. Shin Yuchu's voice was low and pleasant, and Lin Jinan immediately backed down, admitting he hadn't considered the consequences. Just then, Madame Lin began coughing inside. Lin Jinan and Lin Fan hurried back inside. Lin Yu stood at the door, hesitating for a long time as he listened to her weak voice drifting from within. She told them she was fine and had simply been tired, finding the brief faint to be a restful sleep. Only then did the tension in Lin Yu's heart finally begin to ease. Shin Yuchu asked if he was going in, but he whispered that it was better not to, as another argument would only disturb Madame Lin's much-needed rest. As he turned to leave, the old lady arrived, supported by her butler. She announced she had come to visit because she heard her grandson-in-law's mother was hospitalized. Lin Yu took her arm and gently corrected her, saying Madame Lin wasn't his mother. The old lady looked puzzled, wondering if she had somehow made a mistake. She pulled out her phone and showed him a photo, claiming he had sent it to her himself, saying it was a picture of him and his mother. Lin Yu was stunned. In the photo, he and Madame Lin were sitting by the sea, smiling brightly like a real mother and son. To be honest, the image looked perfectly natural. But he hadn't seen her since leaving the Lin family, so a photo like this was impossible. He zoomed in and realized it was actually a very clever composite image. He asked her when he had sent this, but the old lady shook her head, unable to remember. He then asked how it was sent, perhaps by email or a text message. She continued to shake her head, unable to recall the details. Lin Yu felt a bit helpless, but the old lady remained determined to see the woman in the room. The old lady insisted that Madame Lin was his mother and he shouldn't ignore her. After seeing her off, we find Shin Yuchu standing in the corridor. Lu Chong soon approached to report that Lin Yu had been working at a private restaurant when he happened to run into the Lin family. Shin Yuchu's voice was cold as she wondered if the salary the Shin group paid him was so low that he had to take outside jobs. The assistant explained the pay was fine, but the tasks assigned by the supervisor were so difficult he likely feared being fired. Shin Yuchu felt it wasn't that simple. She asked what the Lins were doing there, and learned they had an appointment with Dr. Yu. Shin Xian was only there because of that, yet Dr. Yu never showed up. A faint light flickered in Shin Yuchu's deep, thoughtful eyes. She entertained a rather absurd thought. Meanwhile, inside the ward, Madame Lin felt much better after resting, and Lin Fan suggested Shin Xian head home. Lin Fan looked a bit awkward, knowing Shin Xian had only stayed to wait for Dr. Yu. Madame Lin realized this and asked for her phone. She felt she should explain the missed appointment to Dr. Yu. Only after she rescheduled did Lin Fan finally walk Shin Xian to the door. In the hallway, Lin Fan assured her that there would be no issues with Dr. Yu. He mentioned his current position at the Shin Group. He admitted there were some technical hurdles in the R&D department that he needed Dr. Yu's help to overcome and secure his standing. He emphasized how important the doctor was to him. As the two entered the elevator, Lin Yu stepped out from the shadows and entered the ward. Lin Jinan's face darkened instantly as he demanded to know why he was back, but Madame Lin's gentle voice called out for him to enter. Lin Jinan warned him not to upset her again, but she insisted her collapse wasn't Lin Yu's fault, but rather her own lack of sleep. Madame Lin spoke softly, taking Lin Yu's hand and asking if he had been frightened. Her palm felt warm, and he managed a small smile. She told him to visit home more often and mentioned his wife, whom Lin Fan had called a delinquent, though she didn't believe it for a second. She noted that Lin Yu always had good judgment, so anyone he chose must have merits. She asked to meet her someday, making his eyes sting. He agreed as she began coughing again. He pulled out a plastic bottle, explaining it was cough medicine he had specially acquired for her. Madame Lin nodded and took it. As he left, he heard Lin Jinan inside, scoffing at how easily she was won over by some mystery clinic's medicine. He carelessly tossed the bottle into the trash can. Later that night, as the hospital grew quiet, Madame Lin lay awake in the dark. Waking up again with anxiety so heavy it led to dark thoughts, he found himself reaching into the trash to retrieve the medicine he had discarded. A cool sensation immediately soothed his itching throat, and he drifted into a deep sleep. By 10 the next morning, Madame Lin was still resting. When Lin Jinan finally woke her, they realized she had slept straight through the night. He assumed the doctor's sleeping pills had finally worked. She had slept for 10 full hours, leaving Nanny Nan so excited her eyes grew red. Madame Lin, however, was confused about these supposed sleeping pills. Nanny Nan looked toward Lin Fan, explaining that Shin Xian had specially found a potent sedative and mixed it into her regular medication. It seemed to have worked wonders. Madame Lin paused, feeling her throat clearer than before, as her gaze fell on the unlabeled plastic bottle by her pillow. Lin Jinan was full of praise for his future daughter-in-law, noting how impressive she was. After all, the hospital had been completely full. It was Shin Xian who used her connections to secure this room, and Lin Fan was quick to seize the moment to push her agenda. He urged his mother to help Shun Xian in return for her devotion, explaining that the family wanted her to manage the R&D department. The researchers didn't respect her yet, but with Dr. Yu's technical support, her position would be secure. Madame Lin hesitated for a moment. She eventually agreed to ask the doctor, though she made it clear she wouldn't push if he refused. Lin Fan, however, was already smiling with confidence. In his mind, Dr. Yu had never once turned down a request from Madame Lin. She took out her phone and carefully composed a message. She asked if he had time for a favor. When the message arrived, Lin Yu had just returned from a walk with the old lady. He frowned, wondering what Madame Lin could possibly need. He worried there might be an issue with the medicine he gave her. That medicine was still in the clinical trial stage, and he had only provided it early because her condition seemed so dire. Feeling anxious, he asked the nurse to take the old lady back to her room while he hurried over to Madame Lin's ward. He arrived to find Shun Xian and Lu Li there, their laughter coming to an abrupt halt the moment he stepped through the door. Feeling like an intruder, he turned to leave, but Lu Li mocked him for clinging to the wealthy old lady Shun as if he were above them now. As he tried to walk away, she grabbed him, sneering at his efforts to please the Shun matriarch by performing menial tasks all night. She told him he was dreaming if he thought they would ever see him as family. To them, she claimed, he was nothing more than a plaything. Lin Fan quickly interjected, telling her not to speak that way since the old lady Shin clearly valued Lin Yu, but Lu Li's voice only grew sharper. She scoffed at the idea of him being valued, turning instead to flatter Shin Xian, mentioning how impossible it had been to find a hospital bed yesterday. Even wealthy families were stuck on waiting lists, she claimed, and it was only thanks to Shun Xian that Madame Lin secured this VIP room. Shun Xian looked at Lin Yu with a humble smile, suggesting that if her aunt had known, she surely would have helped, though she was happy to do her part. Lu Li sneered at Lin Yu again, insisting that even if the young Miss Shin knew him, she wouldn't care, no matter how much he tried to please them. To them, she said, he was just a stray pet to be toyed with. Lin Yu clenched his fists, while outside, Shin Yuchu heard every word. Her expression turned cold as ice. Lu Chong, sensing his boss's mood, cleared his throat loudly and stepped into the room to greet Madame Lin. He announced he was there on behalf of President Shin to check on her, asking if she found the room comfortable. Silence fell over the ward. Everyone turned to Shun Xian, who looked utterly bewildered, while Lu Li stammered, assuming Shin Xian had asked the president for the favor. Shin Xian's face froze. Lu Chong smiled and clarified that it was actually Lin Yu who had asked the president to make these arrangements. He then asked Shin Xian if she had also contacted the president. She looked as if she wanted to vanish, muttering about making many phone calls. She claimed it was all a misunderstanding, while Lin Fan clenched his fists, feeling the sting of public humiliation. Madame Lin finally broke the tension. She thanked them, saying the room was excellent and that she would visit the old lady once she recovered. Lu Chong replied with a polite nod. He noted that as long as Lin Yu stopped worrying, the old lady would be happy, a comment that clearly elevated Lin Yu's status in the room. Madame Lin was genuinely pleased, while Lin Yu glanced at Lu Li, whose face was twisted with a rage she could barely contain. She began to snap at him, but Lin Jinan barked at her to shut up, telling her that his wife needed rest and ordering her to go home. Lu Li gave Lin Yu one last hateful glare before fleeing. Lin Yu then turned to the bed, asking Madame Lin how she had slept. Her hand tightened around the small, unlabeled bottle hidden under the covers as she admitted she hadn't slept that well in a very long time. Relieved, Lin Yu left with Lu Chong, finding Shun Yuchu leaning against the corridor wall, the light catching the sharp, cold lines of her profile. She looked up from her phone, explaining that her grandmother insisted she come personally. Her voice was distant, yet Lin Yu felt a surge of gratitude. The ward door swung open, and as Shun Xian and Lin Fan stepped out, they found Lin Yu and Shun Yuchu standing together, a sight that made Lin Fan look as though he were facing a mortal enemy. Shun Xian instinctively demanded to know what her aunt was doing there, but Shin Yuchu simply looked at her with a cold, satisfied poise, noting that she hardly needed to report her movements to her niece. The sheer pressure of her presence made Shun Xian's palms sweat, leading her to turn a spiteful gaze toward Lin Yu, asking if his wife minded him spending all his time at the hospital.